Whether it's tampon Tim Walz threatening to bully Trump, ratchet Jasmine Crockett auditioning for the Real Housewives of Atlanta, or the Hamas caucus duo of Ilhan and Rashida, the biggest problem with the Democrat Party is the Democrat Party. They aren't just lost and rudderless, they are a sinking ship in the middle of the Bermuda Triangle. But their real problem isn't that they don't have a leader. You can feign, fabricate, or finesse one of those. The problem is they don't have anything to lead. Think about it. They're the party of the status quo 2020 to 2024. They hate the big, beautiful bill, but they have no alternative. They can't articulate anything they want to cut outside of maybe the defense budget, but they also want to prop up endless war in Ukraine, so they can't even use that one as a fallback. They've also made it clear that they don't not only not want to cut back, they don't want to send anyone back either. Not even the murderers, the rapists, the traffickers, the terrorists. They also hate Trump's tariffs, but what's their big, beautiful solution to save American jobs, reshore American companies, or balance a trade deficit built on deals that screw Americans? I haven't heard it. They have half-heartedly agreed we have an anti-Semitism problem, but then they bitch and moan when the Trump administration does something about it. The excuse is always, not that way. Well, your way isn't working. So besides taxing more, spending more, putting men and women's sports, keeping lopsided trade deals, and transing kids, what is the vision? The vision, if they're honest, is the way it was 2021 to 2024. And who the hell wants to go back there? Not I. But here to defend his point of view and the party is attorney and former chief counsel of the House Judiciary Committee, Julian Epstein. Julian, thank you so much for being with me. You heard my monologue. The Democrat Party could use a little help, a little strategy right now. Do you agree?
Well, Tomi, first of all, it's thank you for having me on, and it's a delight to be back on with you. We've been on air a couple times together, and it's great to be on your podcast. In your monologue, you said, I'm here to defend the party. I'm not, because I don't think it's defensible. I'm here to critique the party. I think the party has gotten lost in wokeism beyond belief on almost every single issue. I mean, on culture issues, it's for open borders. On race issues, it's for race essentialism rather than a colorblind society. On gender, it believes in deconstructing the two genders. Everyone is the same. It's sort of a neo-Marxist ideology. On energy, it was climate extremism that everyone is pulling away from, including the Western Europeans. And they've gotten just about everything wrong, I think, on culture issues. On economy, I think you nailed it when you said the Democrats, it's just an oppositional and an obstructionist party. It has nothing really positive to offer in any meaningful way, because mostly what the Democrats offer on economic issues is an enlarged welfare state. And that's not popular either. And so you sort of have to ask the question, Tomi, why are the Democrats after a trouncing in November? Why do they cling to these extremist positions and to these sort of cringy antics, this street theater? And we've seen it from, we're here to fight videos, sort of all of the nonsense you see every day with Tim Walz. Why do they cling to these things? And I think the answer, Tomi, is a couplefold. One is that the progressives have developed an authoritarian intimidation machine where if you depart from orthodoxy, they come after you personally. It's still the cancel culture. And two, I think there is a self-exaltation, self-dealing phenomena within the left, whereas if you adopt the oppressor-oppressed ideology, in other words, if you say, we are fighting for the wretched of the earth against the oppressors, you gain social credit scores within the progressive community, but you alienate 80% of the rest of the population. And I don't think the progressives seem to care that much, because it is, as I say, about self-dealing. It's about their own self-exaltation and self-aggrandizement within their narrow community. The larger electorate be damned. And until the Democrats can break away from this sort of deconstructionist ideology, the oppressor-oppressed ideology, and go back to the common sense where they were in the 1990s, I think you're going to see a major realignment in Democratic politics in favor of the Republicans. So I'd love to sit here on this podcast, which I've seen several times, and I have to say I really enjoy it, and disagree with you and fight with you. It might make it a more interesting show, but I don't disagree with you.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. And I appreciate your assessment. I think that you're spot on. I think not only do they want this oppressed, oppressor, woke relationship and narrative to continue, I think that they also enjoy that narrative because it's flashy. It's not flashy to talk about the economy, right? It's not flashy to talk about securing the border necessarily. It's flashy, though, to talk about trans rights and gay rights and all these other things that they've cherry picked to put on the top of their platform. Those things get you attention and they get a reaction. So that's where they're going with them. But you brought up the oppressed and the oppressor thing. That's why I guess I am so stupefied, so just mystified, because I can't think of another group in America right now more oppressed truly than Jewish Americans. But the left doesn't want to seem to come to their aid at all. And they get really upset when President Trump does try to do something. Now, I keep hearing people, even on the right, say, oh, I don't know if this is the right way to go about it with Harvard, cutting the funding. I don't know if this is the right fight to have. I don't know if we should keep them from enrolling international students. And, maybe they have a point there. But to my earlier point, the Trump administration is at least trying to do something. That's all they have. That's the only way that they can compel Harvard and these other institutions to protect Jewish students, is to take the money away. That's like the only option. But then still the left says, no, 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 not like that. So I guess my next question for you is, why, if they're so invested in this oppressed oppressor narrative, why not the Jews?
Yeah, it's a it's a great question, Tommy, and thank you for asking it. I mean, this has been going on, since the Egyptians and the Assyrians and the Babylonians. The Jews today are 0.2% of the global population. In the Mideast, they're 2% of the population. They have 1% of the land. Arabs have 98% of the land. They're about 99% of the land. They're 98% of the population. And the Jews in Israel have consistently offered peace to the Palestinians. And since the Balfour Declaration and the Peel Commission, the Arabs have consistently denied it. And they've said their goal is the elimination of Israel. Why is it that the Jews are not treated as the oppressed here? Well, I think this goes back to the academic leftists, the anti-Western academic leftists like Francis Fanon and Herbert Marcuse and others in the 1960s that sought to join the Palestinian cause in a weird way, because the Palestinian cause has always been, in many ways, in terms of their leadership, a neo-Nazi cause. They sought to join that, and with a lot of support from the Soviet Union in the 1960s and 1970s, as an anti-Western crusade, an anti-capitalist crusade. And you've seen this happen on college campuses now for 50 years. And so it's part of this idea that the Jews, because they're successful, and Israel, because it's successful, it's the only democratic, multicultural country in the Mideast, but that somehow they are the oppressors. And it's a perverse ideology that has been adopted by the academic left, which is why I think Trump is right to go after the universities. I think he's taking a broad brush, but I think in the end, Harvard and the others realize they're going to have to meet him somewhere in the middle, and hopefully there'll be some useful reform. But, you raise a really, really interesting question, Tommy, here is, why has a sort of a neo-Nazi movement, a violent movement, become so popular on the left? I mean, if you look at the Columbia University Apartheid Divest, the anti-Israel group in Columbia University, according to a lawsuit, they had advanced knowledge of the October 7th attack. They were celebrating the massacre, the genocidal massacre on October 8th. And yet you've had Democratic members of Congress, Tommy, defending this group. The Students for Justice in Palestine has repeatedly praised the October 7th genocidal massacre, where babies were murdered and beheaded and put in ovens, and women were dismembered in the most grotesque, barbaric of ways. And the left has celebrated this in their sort of the perverse oppressor-oppressed worldview that they have, where that has become, as I say, really, really sort of perverse. Tommy, just I think a couple days ago, 21 groups from the left openly endorsed the assassination of the 2 Israeli embassy workers in Washington, D.C. They openly endorsed it, including chapters of or caucuses of the Democratic Socialists of America, which AOC and Bernie Sanders, last time I checked, were members. And I haven't heard any Democrats disavowing or denouncing these groups. So what has happened on the left is they have not only completely, through a perverse worldview, failed to see who the victims are here, which was Israel, who was attacked, and they're defending themselves now, but they've actually created a comfortable place and permission slips for what I think is a neo-Nazi movement on the political left that is not being dealt with appropriately. And thank God, for Trump and people like Marco Rubio, who said in a tweet, if you harbor terrorists or sympathize with terrorists, you're not going to be welcome here. I mean, thank God somebody has the moral clarity to see what's really going on here and to take it seriously.
Yeah, we have that statement from Secretary Rubio there, which I think was a strong one. And it's the exact type of statement that needs to be made. It needs to be called out for what it is. This reminds me of back during the Obama administration when President Obama caught a lot of flack from me and others, rightfully so, for not admitting that we had a radical Islamic terrorism problem. It's like every time we had an attack, whether it be in the US or abroad, and it was carried out by a Muslim fundamentalist extremist, President Obama seemingly wouldn't say it was like a problem with Islam. And the rest of us were like, you know what? This keeps happening though. And the people that are doing it are like, we're doing this in the name of Islam. And still there would be leaders on the left, including President Obama, who would refuse to call it that. And it was like this dog and pony show of how they could skirt the issue. Now, that's not to say that every Muslim is violent or every Muslim is going to carry out a terror attack. But when you have an extremist wing of your religion that is carrying out attacks and quite happy and flippantly says that they want to eliminate Jews, death to America, like maybe we should talk about it. But there's always been this resistance to talk about it on the left. But I'm also rather confused that the left tries to do two things at once. Like the two most extreme parts of the left are adverse to one another. For example, you've got these people that are like pro-Hamas, pro-Palestinian, pro-Muslim, but then the same people in some cases are the Queers for Palestine, LGBTQ, and trans. Those things do not match up. They're oil and water, but yet they're still existing in the same extremist part of the Democrat Party. How do they make sense of that?
Well, first of all, there was a lot there, Tommy, and I thank you for having said that during the Obama administration and consistently since then. I mean, you and people like Douglas Murray and Ian Hersey have been warning about this for a long time. And you look at what's happening in Europe right now. There were similar attacks in France and England last week. You look at what's been happening in Britain with the gang attacks on British women that haven't been prosecuted, and there is a massive infiltration of extremism inside Western culture, such that the political left now is intimidated because of a bizarre construction of this idea of political correctness, where you believe in multiculturalism, and if another group says something, you have to respect their values, even if those values are completely inimical to sort of Western liberalism, classical liberalism. So it's bizarre, but what I think is the answer to the question is that the Islamic extremist movement has seen the American left as a very convenient target for infiltrating the West because of this political correctness, wokeness issue, where they know they can get away with almost anything because the left will say, oh, we believe in multiculturalism, therefore we can't critique them. And it's bizarre and strange. And progressives in the West have sort of taken this idea, well, going back to the Soviets in the 1960s, who sort of funded much of what we know today as the PLO and the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinians are anti-capitalist and we're anti-capitalist, so we can join forces even if they are the most oppressive movement on the face of the earth. And, you look at what would happen to these Queers for Palestine if they were in Gaza today and Hamas were in control. They'd be thrown off the roofs of buildings. So the incredible contradiction and the inability of the progressives to face the fact that Israel was the victims, Their people, the goal of Hamas was the elimination of all Israelis. It was a real genocide, an attempted genocide. And the left can't deal with that because they think being progressive and being for the Palestinians makes them a good person. But as soon as they're confronted with the facts where the Palestinian leadership is doing things that are evil, what does it make them? It makes them evil, progressives. And they can't deal with that. Their entire worldview collapses. So they have to persist with this mythology that I think almost no one else believes, that they are standing up on the side of righteousness. And it's amazing how much ideology will make you stupid and blind. And I think that's what's happened in this case. But I thank you for these questions because you're getting at the heart of the matter.
Yeah, it's just hard. It's mystifying for people on the right or, conservative folks to wrap our minds around. Like, I understand that they're married to wokeism, but at what cost? And especially when the varying degrees of your wokeism are not consistent with one another. It's just, it's very odd to me that they can rationalize this, but I guess some can. I also am very confused by how some on the left are operating, and I think a lot of it is for attention. But we had a video, you mentioned the choose your fighter thing. Well, then we've got Eric Swalwell, who's kind of a failed Democrat in every sense of the word, tried to run for president. That was embarrassing. You had the whole Fang Fang thing. That was embarrassing. And now you've got him making this little taco video. I got to play it because it's just that bad. Let's take a look.
Do we have to see it?
We do.
Hey, Congressman.
Can I help you?
What the up with Trump always chickening out on tariffs?
Anything else?
Nope, that's it.
I mean, it's so bad. I mean,
Really
at least
bad.
I will give Jasmine Crockett this. She's got charisma. I think the things she says are moronic, but she's got charisma. Swalwell has zero charisma. He has about as much charisma as the pillow that's sitting underneath of me right now. But he's trying to be like the it guy, and it's not
Yeah.
working. And another thing I don't understand, even if he is trying to make this cutesy little thing and they think it's so funny calling Trump taco because Trump always chickens out, ha, ha, ha. And to me, that just goes back to the original point here. It's like, okay, so wait a second. You were mad at Trump because he implemented tariffs. You fought the tariffs tooth and nail. You used to be the party of protecting American workers. Not so anymore. Trump wants to protect American workers, so now you hate tariffs. But now you're saying when he actually implements a pause on the tariffs because he's saying, okay, we want to give a little relief. We don't want to cause the markets to go in a tailspin. We need a little more time to renegotiate. Then they call him a chicken. So what is it? Is he this guy that's the tough on tariffs? You hate tariffs, and then he pauses them and you're still mad about it. You call him a chicken. Again, there's no consistent message. What do they actually want?
Tomi, I'd love to disagree with you. I'd love to mix it up with you and disagree with you, but I don't know how to explain it. I mean, it's goofy. I mean, you look at that video clip and it's just really goofy and cringe. If you want to mock someone or ridicule someone, it sort of has to stick. This taco thing, nobody understands outside the political progressive elitist bubble. Nobody understands what anyone's talking about. And it doesn't stick with Trump. Trump's the guy who survived two assassination attempts. He's the guy who survived Russiagate and lawfare. Nobody thinks of Trump as a chicken. He may start off large on an issue and sort of try to meet in the middle. He may do a lot of gunslinging. There may be some of that. But this taco stuff is so goofy. And it tells you two things about the Democrats that are important. One is they don't really have any self-awareness. They don't really have any sense as to how these tactics are coming across to normal everyday voters. And they're not working. They're falling flat. And what that's doing is it's underscoring your central point and your opening monologue, Tomi, that the Democrats don't have anything to talk about. So if they don't like tariffs, to your example, what is their alternative for rescuing the working class voters who have been forsaken in the last 3 decades? What's their answer to that? They don't have one, right? If they don't like the 15 million immigrants or so that have come in the last, 4 or 5 years, if they don't like that, what is their answer other than these ridiculous antics where they are opposing ICE agents doing their job in the deportations? They don't really have an answer. You can go down the list on everything. What is their answer if they don't like what Trump is doing? What is their answer other than these ridiculous street theater antics that fall flat and that sort of underscore this point that there really is no Democratic alternative that's meaningful or attractive to voters. So it just makes everything worse for the Democrats. My bet is if you asked his colleagues, most of them would tell you they wish he would just drift into the background.
And that could be said about a number of people in the party, including Tim Walz. It's so bizarre to me, but I think that's my thing too, is I thought maybe after November happened, I thought maybe Democrats would realize the big F-ups that they just jumped on. Like they just jumped on all these grenades, the Joe Biden cognitive decline, Kamala Harris as a candidate not actually having a primary process, lying to the American people, the open border, saying that, oh, we needed the bipartisan border bill to secure the border. Actually, we didn't, just need to actually secure it. I thought maybe they would be like, okay, we're going to be with Trump on getting out the criminals. And then, maybe they could have been like, oh, don't take grandma. And then maybe people will be like, okay, don't take grandma. But they're not just like, don't take grandma. They're like, don't take anybody. And then this whole narrative that they're pushing of, well, it's not that we don't want to deport criminal aliens, it's that we want them to have due process. To the average person out there, I think that sounds ridiculous. To the average person that's listening to the way that they're spinning this narrative, it's like, wait a second here. We've got murderers and rapists wandering around, in some cases, like in Boston, like child offenders, sex offenders by schools or playgrounds. And you guys are really sitting there crying tears about their like due process, and you want them to stay longer, and you want to afford them more than they've already taken for the American people. The average American thinks that's crazy talk. But the Democrats still haven't moved off of it. And I mean, are they talking to the wrong people? Are they getting their poll numbers from outer space? I just can't rationalize strategically why they're doing it.
I can't either, Tomi. And I agree with you on that list of issues that you just sort of ticked off. And I think there are a couple of dynamics that are sort of going on here. One is there is this idea that the Democrats can improve their own social credit within their own communities by adopting these extremist positions. I think that they think that this enhances their social credit scores within their communities, and
so I have to ask you on that point then there. I understand that they think that like they're going to get back the Latin vote or the Hispanic vote if they stand up for illegal immigrants. But again, they're standing up for criminal, alien, illegal immigrants that have committed atrocious crimes, and they're standing up for them. Do they think that that's what Hispanic and Latino voters want, is for other Hispanic and Latinos that have committed horrible, atrocious crimes to stay here? Is like that how they think they're going to win the Hispanic vote? Like, don't worry, we'll stand up for all of you based on your racial or ethnic identity, even the ones who have committed awful crimes in immigrant communities and in American communities. Is that really what they think?
I think they did think that, and it's impossible to believe that they do think that as well. Hispanics are moving in droves over to the Republican Party right now, and I don't think Hispanic Americans are any more sympathetic to illegal immigration than any of the rest of us are. So they're completely misleading the Hispanic voter if they believe that's what is going on. So there's that. I also think there is what I call an OnlyFans equivalent, political equivalent of OnlyFans that's going on, which is, to your point, they believe taking sensational positions and all the street theater and sort of all of these other things are very good for their social media following and for, making them sort of popular influencers. They're more interested in being influencers than they are in sort of really tackling the issues in a sensible way that's going to give them a chance to get back into the game politically. And, the problem is, and I've been saying this for 2 years, is that the Democrats cannot say no to the activist groups. They are scared of the hard left has taken over the party. They have taken over the donor class. They've taken over the activist class. They've taken over the online enforcers. And Democratic politicians like Seth Moulton, who came out against biological men playing in women's sports, he was crucified. And that's just one example. And they made an example of him that if you oppose progressive orthodoxy, you will pay a big fine. You will pay a big punishment. And so I think the dynamic that is happening within the Democrats is, one, they want to be the political equivalent of OnlyFans influencers. And they think all of these antics, even though they're unpopular with the voters, gets them credit, gets them fundraising, gets them attention. And secondly, they're scared of the enforcement regime that the progressive militants have imposed, mostly through social media, so that if they take a position like Seth Moulton that is common sense but contrary to progressive orthodoxy, they will be ostracized. And that's the dynamic that's going on within the progressive left. And that's why they can't break away from stupid.
Well, I'm glad that you brought up the men and women's sports, because I think that's such an important example. Again, this is like a 90-10 issue. I want to bring up the photo from just this past weekend of A.B. Hernandez, again, a biological teen boy, right, who won first in 2 events, state championships in California. We have the faces blurred because, again, these are juveniles. But going back to the point of things in the party narrative not jiving with one another, you've got A.B. Hernandez, which, if we're being honest, A.B. Hernandez is a white teenage boy, right? I thought the left hated white men. I thought that they thought white men, the white supremacy of white men, was the worst thing that could happen to this country. We've heard it many times. So you've got a white male, A.B. Hernandez, if we're being honest, sharing the podium with what I believe is a black female athlete. So that black female athlete, and again, I don't want to assume anybody's race. It appeared to be a black female from my perspective, with faces blurred out and whatever. So again, that's bizarre to me. I thought that the left believed in the oppression totem pole, and I've heard time and time again that black women are at the top of the oppression totem pole. But you've got a white man who has now taken a spot away from what appears to be a black female. And the left is like, go white man. I'm perplexed.
Well, in the left's view, a white transgender man would be maybe at the top of the oppressed totem pole.
But isn't that effed
don't
up?
Ask me to explain it.
Like,
don't ask me to explain it. I can't explain it.
But that's so effed up, isn't it? Like, based on their own logic. Isn't that so effed up that somebody can say, you know what? I want to be given the most specialist treatment. So I'm going to pretend to be a girl, and that will catapult me to the top of the totem pole. Like, that's narcissistic. That's narcissistic. That's delusional. That's sick.
I'm with you, Tommy. I'm with you. Again, I'd love to argue with you, but I'm with you. It's no more effed up, in my view, than the progressive left embracing groups that support the October 7th genocide, because they think this is part of the march of the anti-capitalism progressive ideology. It's a perversion. It's a distortion. It's a pathology. You and I can agree on transgenders that, we believe in the American credo. And the American credo is that everybody should be treated with respect and decency, including the trans community. We agree with that. We agree everyone should be treated with respect and decency. That is the American credo. But when you drift into this sort of genders don't matter. There's no, the gender lines can be completely blurred. Borders are completely open. It is all of this interlocking, intersectional, progressive ideology that is deconstructionist in terms of the things that have made the West great. That is when people scratch their heads and say, this is a party I just don't relate to. If the Democrats said transgender people may be gender dysphoric, and particularly as teenagers, they need our love and care, everyone would be for them. Everyone would support that. I would support that. But when you start saying that biological men can go into women's spaces, whether it's sports or bathrooms or prisons, you're never going to win that argument. And all of, you look at the caste study, for example, all of the science is sort of discrediting all of the arguments about sort of pediatric gender transitions through surgery and through pharmaceuticals. It's all being discredited, and it's just an argument that they're never going to win, but they stick to it for the reasons we talked about before.
Okay, last thing I want to talk to you about is something else that I think the Democrat Party at large is going to have to reckon with, and they don't want to at all. And that is what I refer to as the big cover-up, the big lie about Joe Biden's decline. I think that I've said it, and I believe it. I don't think that any Democrat running for a true leadership position within the party, whether that's actually running for it or being anointed to it as just kind of a party leader until we have another election, I don't think it can be anybody that covered up the big lie or was dishonest about the big lie or feigned ignorance about the big lie. I don't think anybody that was near it, touched it, was around it, that talked about it, I don't think that they will have any credibility with the American people now that we're getting more and more information that many of us already knew about the physical and mental decline of Joe Biden, maybe even going into the territory of Joe Biden's auto pen signing things that he wasn't even aware he signed. That's like under duress. Not only under duress, if he wasn't even there and people are just signing it in his name, that's criminal. Yeah. But you've got, Bill Clinton, who I actually think at the time in the 90s was, by today's standards, a conservative. But he tried to cover up for the decline as well and feign ignorance. I want to play the clip.
Speaking of aging, there's this book that came out that talks about Joe Biden and the people around him seeing that he had cognitive and physical decline. Did you ever have a moment with him where you thought maybe he was unfit to run for president? No.
I thought he was a good president. The only concern I thought he had to deal with was, could anybody do that job until they were 86? And we'd had several long talks. I had never seen him and walked away thinking he can't do this anymore. He was always on top of his brief.
You never saw any cognitive decline?
So I didn't know anything about any of this, and I haven't read the book. I saw President Biden not very long ago, and I thought he was in good shape. But the book didn't register with me because I never saw him that way.
Why didn't you read the book?
I didn't want to.
So I have to just call that out as a lie. And I call it out as a lie because Bill Clinton and others who were trying to feign ignorance, they're smart people. So I'm probably smarter than me in almost every way. I'll give it to him. Smarter than me. But if I saw it as somebody who at the time was like 29 years old watching TV and was like, yeah, that guy's slipping. If I could see it, all right, you're telling me the former president of the United States couldn't see it and he was around him physically, personally, and he couldn't see it? Okay, that's a lie. Do you agree?
Look, Bill Clinton is one of the few Democratic politicians that I still sort of revere. I got to know him. He's always been very, very good to me. And I think if the Democrats were where he was in the 90s, they wouldn't be having these problems. That said, I disagree with him on that. I think it was clear in 2021 that Biden was not up for completing the first term, never mind the second term. I think it was clear to all of us. There were literally scores, if not hundreds, of examples of it. I mean, Biden didn't know what his general's positions were in Afghanistan in August of 2021. I mean, if that isn't a red flag that his mental decrepitude is not putting the national security at risk, I don't know what is. So I think the cover up to the beginning of your question, I think the cover up by the Democratic Party en masse is one of the greatest indictments on the integrity of the party. The party already has a trust deficit on all the major issues. We talked about that, Tomi, at the beginning of the segment. They now have a trust deficit on their basic integrity because I think it was a conscious lie that they made to the American voters. I think the media is just also, I mean, they are all into this let's move on sort of mentality. No, let's not move on. You can't move on from what is one of the greatest cover-ups in modern history without accountability. And the media, you know, they make Ron Burgundy look like serious journalists. I mean, it was obvious to me. I was writing about this at the end of the midterms, that Biden should not be running. He didn't have the mental capacity to run a second term, and that this was going to come home to bite the Democrats in the butt. And it was just obvious. And so I think, like, you know, the funny thing is that in the same way that the American voters see things like the trans issue and the immigration issue, the Democrats are just out to lunch on those. They saw through it as well before Biden pulled out, and even before the debate. Something like 80% of voters wanted him to pull out of the election. So it was an attempted lie that the American people didn't buy, but that doesn't make the conscious attempt to gaslight the American people any better. There, to your question, the Democrats have not finished answering as to how they could attempt to pull the wool over the American voters' eyes. I agree that candidates in the future, like Gavin Newsom and Pete Buttigieg, are going to have a very difficult time with their own credibility because they were all in on the cover-up. And I think you're going to need new voices that were not in on the cover-up. And I just think, you know, the media, if they don't want to own up and fess up to the fact that they failed to go after the story the way they went after Russiagate, the goods weren't there on Russiagate, but they went after it 4 years nonstop. I even made, you know, I was guilty sometimes of doing that as well until I saw the evidence, which there was none, at least of criminal collusion. They were all in on that. And then when something is as obvious as Biden's mental decline, as obvious as the light of day, and they fail to go after that, that tells you one thing, that they do not want to do their jobs as journalists because they are putting their thumbs on the scale of one side, that they are partisans fundamentally.
Well, we all knew that, though, but they just outed themselves. But on the point,
Correct.
like, you're going to get no pushback from me on going after the media. But to this point about the Democrat Party, I really want your honest assessment of this, because it's one of those things that, again, I can't quite figure out, but I have my theories. So do you think that the Democrat Party thought that perhaps they could get Joe Biden reelected, and then he would either die in office or have to step down, and then Kamala could be president without having to win? Or do you think that they were so nervous about having to put Kamala up for election because they were married to their DEI, of course? They had to, the black woman was not going to be, it is not going to be pushed to the back of the line. We knew that. Do you think that was the motivation? That it was like, okay, we know he's slipping, but we got to get him through because we can't run Kamala, until they were absolutely pushed into the back of the wall, the back of the corner with the Kamala thing? Like, what was it that made them want to keep up the charade? What was the underlying motivation there, in your opinion?
Well, I think it is a mendacious thirst for power. I mean, Mike Donnellan, one of the president's closest advisors, said nobody walks away from Air Force One, or something to that effect, right? I think it was a desire to cling for power. It was sort of putting on blinders. Let's go for broke on this. We will just demonize Trump and call him a Nazi, and we will make it through, and we'll figure it out afterwards. If Biden retires, or if we have basically a puppet presidency,
which is what they had for 4 years.
Which is, well, I think it's certainly during the last 2 years. Yeah. And we can sort of run it through the White House staff and the congressional leadership, which is ironic for a group of people saying that their goal was to defend democracy. This is a betrayal of democracy if it isn't borderline treason. It's a really, really serious offense.
Yeah, no kidding.
And who knows where they thought it was going to go at 2024.
But here's my question for you. Were they really worried about having to run Kamala? Because that's what it says to me. It says, okay, we know we got to put Kamala in, but we really want to try to do everything we can to avoid that scenario. That's what it tells me.
I think from Obama on down, they knew Kamala was not a strong candidate.
So they were trying to avoid that scenario.
I think they were trying to figure out the best of bad options, which is what happens when you get blinded by sort of, we're just going to go after and put Trump in jail and worry about things afterwards. In 2022, they should have been figuring out how they have an open primary and how do they move to the political center. I was writing about this in early 2023. Get rid of Biden and move to the political center. It's the only way you're going to win.
You know why they didn't? They didn't because they thought they could pull one over on us. They thought they could make it work because they did in 2020. But the thing that they underestimated about the American people is this. In 2020, people were stupid. In 2020, people were terrified of COVID. In 2020, people were crying at the altar of George Floyd. And they were wearing masks while they were burning down Target. And people were dumb. So they were like, all right, we'll give this Joe Cat a try because we hate Trump. Because people in 2020, I don't want to say people were dumb, but people were blinded in 2020. But then they got smart. They snapped out of it. And the Democrat Party underestimated the will of the American people, the intelligence of the American people, the astuteness of the American people, and they thought they could get away with it. And that's why they tried to do it for as long as possible. And that, to me, is unforgivable.
There's no doubt that they treat the average voter as stupid, because in the same way the average voter could see through the fact that they didn't like the propaganda on the welfare state and all the cultural leftism, they could see through the propaganda on Biden being capable, and that Democrats were just trying to hold on to power. And you know what? The American voter, American people are pretty smart. They have pretty good instinct. They may not be policy wonks like, sort of like you and me, following this stuff every day, but they have a pretty good common sense, basic North Star. And they saw through it all.
Yeah. Well, thank goodness they did. I really appreciate the conversation. I thank you for being so transparent and honest and genuine. I think that the left, the Democrats, the progressives, the non-right, I think that there needs to be a little bit more of that. It would do that side of the aisle good. And I, as an American, I want the other side of the aisle to be, up and running. I don't want it to win, but I want it to be functional. Kind of like our former president, just functional. So best of luck to them on that. Thank you so much for your time. Please come back soon. I really appreciate the dialogue.
Tommy, I enjoy the conversation. I'm happy to come on anytime you want me to.
Thanks so much. Have a wonderful day.
Okay. All right. You too.
All right, folks. Not only was the anti-Jew terrorist here illegally, he was driving for friggin' Uber. There needs to be a reckoning. And now it's time for final thoughts. The case of Mohammed Salman, the anti-Semitic pro-Hamas global Antifada terrorist who literally lit Jews on fire in Boulder, could not be more textbook liberal-enabled F-up if it were scripted, I tell you what. Turns out he not only targeted Jews, he planned it out. Salman admitted in an interview that he wanted to kill all Zionist people and had been planning the attack for a year, and that he would conduct the attack again if he could. But there's more. The filings also show Salman allegedly told investigators he waited to carry out the attack until his daughter graduated high school, and that he specifically targeted the Zionist group in Boulder after learning about them from an online search. This was a premeditated hate crime and an act of terror, but also one that was entirely preventable. Not only did Salman enter this country under Biden's mass invasion free-for-all, he was a visa overstay who was rewarded for his overstay with a frickin' work permit. Does that shock me? Of course not. Nothing Biden's auto pen did surprises me, but here's what infuriates me and rattles me to my very core. Mohammed Salman drove for Uber. The company admitted he did, though golly gee shucks oh my, Uber says all drivers pass a criminal and driving history background check and hold a valid social security number. Well damn, Uber looks like effing not. Don't worry, though. His account has now been banned. Wow, what a relief. Thanks. Now that he's carried out a targeted attack on Jewish Americans and will spend the rest of his life behind bars, preferably in El Salvador, now you've deactivated his Uber account. Good work. Folks, Uber needs to be held accountable for this because something tells me Mohammed Solomon is not the first, the last, or the only dangerous illegal immigrant that's driving for your app. And same goes for Lyft and Uber Eats and DoorDash and the rest of these rideshare or delivery services that unsuspecting and overly trusting Americans use and rely on to either commute or transport our goddamn food. This is serious. This isn't an oopsie. I live here in Nashville, the bachelorette party capital of the world. Do you know how terrifying it is that illegal aliens, visa overstays, undocumented, whatever the hell you want to call them, could potentially be driving young, likely intoxicated female tourists around this town? Do you know how dangerous that scenario could be? Sitting friggin' ducks. And Nashville is one of the many examples. If this is what Uber employs, we're all screwed, quite frankly. And in the case of someone like Solomon, who planned and plotted to kill Jews, imagine if he drove an outwardly Jewish person in his Uber. Uber needs to rectify this and assure and ensure to all of us that people who aren't supposed to be here, let alone drive here, aren't slipping through its apparently very shoddy vetting process. I am so pissed off about this, and you should be too. Uber, what do you have to say for yourself? Because we'd like to hear it. I'll wait. But until then, those are my final thoughts. Please be sure to tune in live tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern. Catch full episodes on Outkick and Fox Nation. Please like and subscribe to the YouTube channel at Tomi Lahren is Fearless. From Nashville, God bless and take care. Hey, thanks for watching. If you want more of my hottest takes, must-see conversations, and of course, my final thoughts, click here and make sure you subscribe here so you never miss a beat. I'll be here every weekday, and I hope you'll join me.